Tom, good morning. Well, we know Arctic ice is melting at a rapid rate. What do the images show us about this year's summer?
So the Arctic is really sensitive to climate change. It's warming at 2 to 3 times the rate that the rest of the planet is. And what our data is showing us is that the sea ice extent in the Arctic Ocean, although it grows and shrinks each year, by combining data from the 70s to today, what we're seeing is that the Arctic sea ice is on track for a near record minimum.
Images are super astonishing, and we know Greenland is experiencing extreme melting as well. What about the ice glaciers there?
So sea ice is that frozen ocean water that grows and shrinks each year. Greenland ice sheet is accumulated snow that sits on land. So as Greenland ice melts, it runs off into the ocean and raises sea levels globally. NASA had a team in the field with Operation Ice Bridge this spring, and they got some of this footage of the early onset of melt in Greenland, and that melt has continued this summer, melting almost the entire surface of the ice sheet and covering it with melt ponds and streams.
With all of these images and all of this video that we have, is there something surprising that you all have discovered?
Well, it's interesting because we launched a new satellite about a year ago called ICESat-2, and it uses lasers in space to measure the height of the Earth globally. Now, by measuring the height of the sea ice, we're able to measure the third dimension of sea ice, the thickness, that we haven't been able to do before. We've been able to measure extent readily, but by adding data from ICESat-2, we get that third dimension. And what we're finding is that the sea ice thickness measured by ICESat-2 is only about half of what was measured by submarines in the 1980s. So not only is the extent changing of the sea ice, but also the thickness.
Absolutely. And right now, the closest Great Lake to Chicago is Lake Michigan. Would all this melting somehow impact that lake or any of the Great Lakes?
The melting of the ice sheet wouldn't really change change the lake level in Lake Michigan or Erie or Ontario, since those sit higher than the rest of the ocean. But the effect that changing sea ice has is that it's changing the energy balance in the Arctic, which changes the location of the jet stream and weather fronts that come through places like Chicago, and changes the weather for us right here in the U.S.
Tom, thank you so much for all that information. We appreciate the research and really all the information gathering that your team has done. And NASA will, of course, continue to keep a close eye on the Arctic from the ground, the air, and space to help us understand how Arctic temperature change is affecting weather around the globe.